We're already hurting in our communities. It's already scary in our communities. Even more cuts makes it scarier.
Hearing that budget cuts could happen, across the board like that, I think it's definitely a concern. I wouldn't like to see that.
So that was the word on the street today from some people who live in Washington County when it comes to budget cuts. The county is in the middle of figuring out what services to get rid of to fill a $20.5 million budget gap in the county's general fund. Philip Bransford, the communications director for the county's administrative office, tells me nothing is off the table.
It's challenging. This is difficult, and this is not the first year we've been at this. We've been looking at general fund budget gaps. This is the 5th year in a row that we've experienced.
So why does this keep happening? Bransford points to inflation and increased population, but primarily the property tax rate is to blame. Washington County has the lowest permanent property tax rate among all the counties in the Portland region.
We're operating in a system, a property tax dependent system, that is by design going to be constrained. So back in the 90s, the system was put in place. It capped and rolled back property tax rates for all local governments. And that system is doing what it was designed to do. It's a very steady, slow growth system. And that slow growth is not keeping up with those cost increase.
So what does this more than $20 million budget gap mean for people who live and work in Washington County? Well, every county department that gets money from the county's general fund was asked to prepare 3 different budgets: 10% cuts, 13%, and 17% cuts. Now, these are departments like the sheriff's office, parks, library services, housing programs, and the district attorney's office. So today, I sat down with DA Kevin Barton to see how those proposed cuts would impact his department.
It's different levels of horrible. I mean, it's like asking someone which limbs do you want to cut off your body? And we are beyond the point where we're trimming fat. We're cutting into bone. And especially now in this era, no one is interested in defunding public safety, defunding police, defunding DAs. But that really is effectively what we're forced to take a hard look at doing, given the county's budget scenario.
The Washington County District Attorney's Office is requesting more than $22 million from the county's general fund. DA Barton tells me he's under the impression the county administrator will move forward with proposing 10% cuts to his department, which Barton says will be devastating. Again, these cuts are not yet final.
If 10% cuts are imposed, then public safety in Washington County will not look the same tomorrow as it does today. Already we're looking at potential layoffs of 19 people in the DA's office in our Child Support Enforcement Division. And we're also looking at the potential for some funding to be less secure to support district attorneys and staff as we're making sure that we can prosecute these cases beyond the Child Support Division. And I find that to be very troubling.
Now, those layoffs in the Child Support Enforcement Division would essentially shutter the local branch, which has been around since the 1960s. And they serve mostly single moms, ensuring that they get the money they're owed to help care for their children. But even beyond that child support program, DA Barton says depending on what percentage of cuts the county decides to move forward with, he warns there could be whole levels of crime that they just stop prosecuting.
That's just absurd. And yet, of course, we were asked to provide the scenario, what would it look like, and so we did. So on one hand, thankfully, they chose the least of the evils in front of us, the 10 rather than the 17, but they're still asking us to cut off a limb, and that's not a good thing. At the end of the day, we're providing less effective resources to address a growing problem, and the community will begin to see the impacts of that, and we know where that goes. It's called Portland.
Okay, so that was what's potentially happening at the district attorney's office, and it's not great. So we asked the Washington County Sheriff's Office how the cuts could affect its operations, but we haven't heard back yet. I also wanted to see how the county's Housing Services Department would make out after potential cuts. They handle things like shelter, affordable housing, rent assistance, and case management work. Well, turns out they have a slightly different challenge ahead. Here's Assistant Director Jess Larson.
There should be no reduction in services because of those general fund reductions.
Okay, that sounds great. And that's because the Housing Services Department gets less than $2 million from the county's general fund. But they are feeling the hit from the forecasted drop in regional government metros' supportive housing services tax money. Because of that, they're prepping for 15% cuts from programs that rely on that metro money. That means some outreach workers and housing navigation workers could be cut. And they are preparing to scale back some temporary shelter programs.
These resources are so critical in our community every day, helping connect someone to shelter or housing and keep them in that housing. So we work really hard to make sure that they're going out the door as effectively as possible. Well, of course, we're always advocating for continued, stable, and hopefully increased resources, because the need is much greater than the resources.
Now, if it feels like everywhere you look, no matter where you live, cuts are coming to local services, that's because they probably are. This is a statewide problem. According to a survey done by the League of Oregon Cities, roughly 1/3 of Oregon's 241 governments are all facing similar budget challenges to Washington County. And Washington County leaders are not at all hopeful that it's going to get better anytime soon.
So we don't have a crystal ball, but we do know that there's a pattern here, and we're going to need to make decisions, smart decisions that put the organization in a better footing, more stable funding over time.
Washington County's final proposed budget will be presented to the Budget Committee on April 28th, with a potential approval vote on May 20th. But before that, there will be several opportunities for you to share your opinions with the county, and they want to hear from you. And so do we. So, if you live in Washington County, what services are most important to you? What do you think about cuts coming for the 5th year in a row? And even if you don't live in Washington County, as you heard from the DA, what happens there impacts surrounding cities. So let us know what you're thinking. Email us at thestory@kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090.